Welcome back to Up North News Radio. I'm Pat Kreitlow, and I'm joined now by Congressman Mark Pocan on this Friday morning as we look ahead to a new administration and new Republican control of both houses of Congress. Congressman Pocan, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I mean, Washington is not the city of action these days. So,
There's more like a siege mentality there, preparing for the barricades to be overrun, perhaps. I don't know.
It's just, hearing all these interesting, and by interesting, I'm using that term with great latitude,
Yes.
cabinet picks and picks for the Trump administration. But also, we're in this week battling communism and other things that there's not really a current problem with, because this House majority still has no idea how to govern, and they're going to have the tightest margin since 1931 in the next session. So we're going to see how well that's going to work.
I don't know if Greg still has it. If Greg has the audio we played yesterday from Speaker Mike Johnson talking about gosh, what a great job they did, with a tight majority last year, and they'll do the same this year. Yep, we got it. Here's what Speaker Mike Johnson had to say earlier this week.
The House would have a larger majority, but redistricting and gerrymandering in the blue states made that almost impossible. But we do have the majority. We know how to govern with that small majority. We've been doing it for a year. We will fill those seats. There'll be 3 vacant when we start, so it'll go from 220 to 217. That is razor thin, but it'll only be for a few months. And we're very confident that we'll get qualified governing conservatives put back in those seats, and we'll grow that margin as we go. I
don't know if I heard any factual information in that statement, Congressman. Did you?
I think I want to buy a Pinto from that guy. He talks very smoothly, but last year we were on track for Congress to get done the least amount of bills since the Congress of 1860 and maybe 1839. And the only thing that might have changed it is we just went through a slew of post office renamings, which, by the way, one being named after Jimmy Carter had about 15 Republicans vote against it. God knows why. But we are in middle of the worst Congress, undeniably, in any of our lifetimes. I mean, you're going back to the mid 1800s, and but we did set a record for speaker votes. We had 19 of them this Congress. So this is about as bad as it can get. At least that's what I keep telling myself, Pat. This next session, though, we actually picked up seats in the House. Democrats did, despite this so-called wave that happened. So we have 215 seats. And what I think the speaker is referring to is, Donald Trump's taken enough people out of their caucus that for the first 3 or 4 months, they can't lose a single member or else they can't pass things. So to say in any way that I serve in a functioning body would mean that I either drink very early in the morning or I am completely delusional.
So it leads to this question, and I ask it in all seriousness, and that is there any potential whatsoever that the new Congress, or Republican-led, with Donald Trump in the White House, would do something that would be seen as bipartisan and positive? Now, the alternative, of course, is that everybody talks about the first 100 days. And so in the first 100 days, much like when Newt Gingrich took over, we might see this flurry of extremist activity. It all gets taken to court. There are protests, etc. That's where you'd put your house money on if you were betting. Right. But I feel like it is important to ask if you see any signs out there that early on there's enough Republicans in the House and Senate and say, let's at least get this thing passed. Is there such a thing out there?
Yeah, there's one silver lining, and I always try to find silver linings because otherwise it's hard to get up in the morning. But this one, if you watched yesterday, there was a Senate hearing, and Democrats and Republicans were pummeling Postmaster General because DeJoy is an embarrassment of multitudes. There's a national experiment on rural delivery he tried in Wisconsin, was one of the experiments, the Green Bay area, and he tanked our delivery rate times by 20%. And when I asked him about it in a subcommittee I was on appropriations, he said, well, in the beginning, when they first fired off rockets, some blew up. And I'm like, oh, thanks for blowing up Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
This guy is so bad that he does bring the two parties together. And I have heard that Donald Trump is likely to fire him, something that Joe Biden supposedly couldn't do because we didn't have the majority of the Postal Board of Governors, but supposedly Donald Trump's figuring out how to do. And honestly, I'm going to applaud that heavily when it happens.
I could not agree more, because I too was dumbfounded that President Biden was following the norms when it comes to the Postmaster General, and yet we see Donald Trump already giving every indication that he's going to fire the FBI director, the one that he appointed to a 10-year term, but that he's going to fire him after 7. So if you're telling me that somebody, I'm not going to give Trump credit, but that somebody said, hey, along with firing the guy we appointed as FBI director, let's also fire the guy we appointed as Postmaster General because nobody likes this guy.
Yeah.
That might actually answer my question as one thing there where every American can look and go, well, they did that much.
Yeah, and honestly, if that happens, I will applaud the action, because Postmaster DeJoy has been an embarrassment on many levels. I've been in both private and public meetings with him. The most obtuse guy. He's combative, doesn't listen to anyone, and all he thinks his job is to trim costs, not that it's actually in the Constitution. Postal Service, of all the federal things we do, there's not that many in the Constitution, and that is, and he couldn't, accept that delivery of mail was their highest function. So, Democrats and Republicans, I remember after we had a private meeting once, and afterwards I had Republicans coming to my side of the floor because I was particularly combative with DeJoy, and we're all high-fiving each other, and we don't usually do that, so he does bring us together in contempt for DeJoy, and if Donald Trump is the one to get rid of him, man, I'm going to applaud it.
Yeah. Well, here's on a different example. And again, I tried to be glass half full with our guest earlier in this week. Yeah. He was from the American Business Immigration Coalition. And this is 1,400 different business groups. And the gist of what they're saying is, look, we know it's going to be really tempting for members of the far right to want to come out of the blocks with mass deportations. Their view is, why don't we come out of the blocks with actually coming together with some common sense immigration reform? Maybe it's the deal that was on the table that Trump killed last year. Maybe it's something different. If you, again, were a betting man and said immigration reform is something where maybe they try to get something sensible passed right away, or the extremists right away try to go the mass deportation route, which one do you think we're going to see in late January, early February?
Yeah, this is one where I think someone just kicked over your half full glass, because I think Donald Trump, don't forget, when he was president before, he talks a lot and promises a lot, but delivers very little. Remember how many times we had infrastructure week, but we never had an infrastructure bill? I've got the feeling he's going to go after right away, go into prisons and places to get rid of the crooks that he talked about that are coming across the country, which is a very, very small number. But then after that, I think a lot of the bravado may not turn into real legislation. He might find a few other ways to try to stop the incoming at the border. But I think it's going to be much more difficult for him to actualize what he said. And honestly, he'll go on and say something else, and then everyone will kind of allow him to, because that's kind of what he's gotten away with his entire career.
Wow. We are also, of course, more than a year behind on passing a farm bill. It's left not just farmers, but people who rely on nutrition programs and exports and everything else hanging for the past year plus. Now, that includes nutrition programs. And for folks who missed it last hour, let's play back what Congressman Tom Tiffany said from up here in the 7th Congressional District about cutting spending and including SNAP nutrition benefits, previously known as food stamps. Here's what Tom Tiffany had to say.
Do something about this overspending that's going on in Washington, D.C. and start to get responsible. And by the way, it doesn't have to be just the discretionary spending. We can get at some of the mandatory spending also. I mean, food stamps, some of those things, that's mandatory spending. I think some of the benefits that are paid in regards to the work requirements, I mean, some of that is under the heading of mandatory spending. We can deal with some of that too. So I'm really encouraged to hear that. And also, boy, the regulatory state, we got to deal with it, because there may be more bang for the buck in terms of growing our economy, of making regulatory changes, get the impediments out of the way, let those job creators and entrepreneurs really be able to go to work. There's probably more bang for the buck there than even the deficit reduction stuff.
When the very first idea out of your mouth is, hungry families need to go hungry more often, that makes me wonder, as if he doesn't think there are any struggling families in his district.
Well, or he doesn't listen to all his constituents, because clearly, seniors are a huge part of that population, by the way, just not talked about a lot, but a lot of seniors are getting supplemental nutrition assistance. But when he says mandatory, don't forget what he's starting to point to are there's a discretionary and non-discretionary, right? Non-discretionary is things like Social Security and Medicare. And this is what they're talking about. When you look at this Doge committee or Dodge, however you pronounce whatever Elon Musk and the other guy is going to do, which they have no authority because Congress has the spending authority. So in large part, this is just, reasons for them to stop at Mar-a-Lago and hang out at dinners. But they're going to come up with all sorts of ideas, but they want to go after Social Security and Medicare. I hope they do raise those issues, because then they'll show themselves for what they really are. But the largest part of discretionary spending, the stuff that we can attack the easiest, is the defense budget. And when you spend $8 billion on amphibious vehicles that only sink, I would say there's some places you could cut, but they don't say that right off the bat. They go after things that actually help his constituents to get by day to day. And it's probably the number one program to keep kids out of poverty is food stamps.
Well, but I guess I thought all I ever heard about was the deficit and the national debt, and we're bankrupting our future. And yet, if you're going to be cutting spending for family nutrition, but you're also going to be cutting taxes for millionaires and billionaires, it makes me wonder if it ever really was about the deficit.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, next year is the big tax bill. We anticipate September, October-ish, they're going to try to pass it because they've gave our new calendar. And by the way, you're going to see this probably background a little more often because I'm going to be out here almost all the time with the calendar they have. But there's a period that we think they're going to try to do the reconciliation bill that'll do the tax bill and all that. It changes the rules because you have one kick of the can every fiscal year to do that with that process because the Senate's weird rules. And but that's the one where you're going to see, again, tax breaks that are largely going to benefit the Elon Musks of the world and not those people on food stamps in Tom Tiffany in my district.
It again just makes me wonder. We've talked so much since the election about where do progressives go from here. I know the Progressive Caucus, has done their leadership and priorities for the year. And we're past the election, but somebody's got to be messaging all of these things back to the voters, back to the constituents, in the process of them trying to do it. And we don't have enough time to do the entire election post-mortem here, but going forward, Congressman, what are your thoughts on whether progressives are going to be, defeated and walk away, or if they're going to be actively involved, not just in trying to oppose things that they can't prevent from passing, but communicating this to the voters back home?
I mean, let me take it at this approach. I think just Democrats in general, whether it's the progressive wing or a more moderate wing of the party, we have to talk about when we were the most successful. I mean, when we're most successful when we're the party of FDR that did help people who are working class people. This year, we lost the population who made between 30,000 and 100,000 for the first time in the last 4 or 5 presidential cycles. And we did it because Donald Trump said things that he's not going to do, but he always says things. You got to remember that last presidency, and he won't deliver. But we didn't talk enough about the minimum wage and really about childcare, which affects a lot of people right now, and healthcare, and all those core economic issues that people talk about at their kitchen table. And, while we certainly had results from the infrastructure bill and things like that, you don't really see it all yet because that's just how government works. So, I think we need to get back to those core FDR economic issues that broadly appeal to people, because Donald Trump ain't going to do them. He's just going to give lip service. Yeah,
couldn't agree more. And instead, he'll show up either at the ribbon cuttings or try to pull back some of the progress that was made during the first half of Joe Biden's term. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks as always. Great to see you on a Friday morning. Take care. We'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks so much, Pat. Take care.
All right.